My name is Gwenael Prié, and we are here for a workshop about Internet, réseaux sociaux et téléphonie mobile vers une redéfinition des mécanismes traditionnels de l'aide, which in English is Internet, social media, and mobile phones, the redefinition of traditional mechanism of humanitarian aid. We have here three very interesting guests that I thank in advance for their presentation and first for their presence. Unfortunately, we had planned for Anaï Ayala Yakuchi from Internews to be here, but for personal reasons, she couldn't make it. So unfortunately, we won't have our presentation. I have been asked to do a few announcements first. First, the streaming. So this whole workshop will be streamed online. And the website's address is www.urgencedelire.fr and in English, www.urgencyofreading.org. We also have a Twitter hashtag that is Urgence de Lire. So it's only in French, only one hashtag for both languages. You are obviously welcome to tweet in English also. We have a few Wi-Fi networks that are available that you might use. The mot de passe, the key is the password is AFFAL217. If you want to note it again, I'm going to repeat. I think that's AFFAL217. And of course, this presentation will mostly be in English, but I'm sure there will be questions in French too, and maybe at some point my rusty English will be too rusty and I'm going to get tired, so maybe I switch back to French. So you might have taken some headsets to have the translation. Please, of course, put them back when you leave the workshop. I'm going to first do a few minutes of introduction of the thematic of the workshop, and then I'm going to give the microphone to our three guests for a short presentation, and afterwards you'll be more than welcome to share your experiences or ask questions to the three of them. Of course, ICTs, and that's not something very original to say, is everywhere in our life today, in our professional life, in the economic world, in our private life, in so much as we can wonder if we still have one. And we always, of course, have a cell phone, smartphone in our hand. So all sectors of human activity have been transformed and revolutionized in the past few decades by this revolution. And it seems only natural that today the humanitarian aid and the development aid sectors also are touched and see a lot of innovation and new ideas. The idea that ICT would bring something new and new innovations that could help development aid in the Southern Hemisphere is not something new. 10 years ago already, at the World Summit for Information Society in Tunis and then Geneva, this idea that ICT could bring something was, of course, already discussed. But at the time, something was seen as a big issue to realize that goal, the digital gap. Not very few people in the southern country had access to any means, any information, any ACT tools. So something big has changed since then. We have gone from 1 billion cell phone lines to almost 7 today. 7 billion on a planet of 7 billion people. That doesn't mean that everybody has a cell phone, because some of the lines are not used. Most of the people in some countries use several lines by each one. So we are a bit less. For instance, in Africa, there is 1 billion people, and the estimation puts the number of users of a cell phone at half the population, so 500 million people. So even today, even the poor people, even the most modest population have access to an ICT tool, a tool that enables them to talk to their family, to talk to partners, to talk to clients, to the administration, to talk throughout the frontiers. And that's something new, of course, that has to be taken into account. And not only people in Africa and elsewhere in the South have access to the platform, but they also innovate by themselves on this platform. And we see some really interesting things that happen in Africa. I will give a few examples. The first one would be M-Pesa. It's an initiative of mobile banking in Kenya, which has been very successful, hugely successful. Something like 10 to 20% of the gross domestic product in Kenya is passing through the mobile banking, this mobile banking application. And we have a lot more. We have a lot of dynamism, especially in Kenya, which is one of the innovation hub of Africa. And today we are very happy to welcome Angela Crandall, who is coming from Nairobi and who is actually a researcher and a project manager, I believe, in one of the places where this innovation is fostered and studied. So she will tell us about it a bit later. But nonetheless, even with mobile phones being so numerous, the access still is a problem for a lot of people. People in the rural areas, of course, where infrastructure is very difficult to deploy, but also along the lines of gender, we have women who are a lot less, who have a lot less access to mobile phones because of financial, maybe cultural reasons for in some contexts. And of course, the poor have a more difficult time to access the mobile phone. So access is still a problem, and I think John from an organization called Ushahidi, who does a lot of other things, will tell us about a tool that will allow people that don't have access to any ICTs to be able to communicate and be brought on board the ICT revolution. Now back to the humanitarian sector, where humanitarian actors are trying to help in times of crisis. ICT are also taking a more and more important role to communicate. To communicate for somebody who's affected by a crisis is very important. And I remember this story by the founder of Bibliothèques Sans Frontières, a French NGO dedicated to bringing some kind of communication facilities to on the crisis. To the people affected by crisis, and he told me that in Yugoslavia 20 years ago, the first thing that people were asking him, he was in an NGO and trying to help, the first thing that people were asking him was not water or shelter or food, it was really to communicate to their family. And they would put out a piece of paper and write down a name and a phone number and tell him the first thing we need you to do to help us is to call this person and tell them that we need help and that we're still alive. So communication is also one of the first things that is brought after a crisis, because it's, of course, the logistics of it are a lot easier than water or shelter or other stuff like this. So how to encourage the use of ICTs by humanitarians and mostly by the communities affected by crisis? That was one of the talk, that was one of the issues that Anaï was supposed to present us, but I invite you to go to the website of the CDAC, which stands for Communicating with Disaster-Affected Communities. Quite literal explanation of what they try to do, and I'm sure you'll find more answer on this. But there is also another direction that ICT that we will explore today. ICT can not only be used for the beneficiaries, but also by volunteers all over the world that want to put their time and energy to the help of the beneficiaries. And so we have seen in the past years the birth of a lot of cooperation platforms that allow people to help in time of crisis. People that may, of course, give money or share the information about the crisis through social media. That's, of course, one of the things that could come to our mind, but also more operational stuff, more operational help, like mapping of areas affected by a disaster, or even translating between different languages. So these different groups have sprung up, and we have here Kat Graham, who will explain us how she tries, I believe, to bring together and discuss all these different communities that have been named the volunteer and technical communities. And I think that's with you that we're going to start the talks. So I leave it to you to explain what you do.
Thank you very much. So, as he was saying, my name is Kat Graham, and I'm here representing the Digital Humanitarian Network. The digital, first I want to introduce a little bit about myself and my organization. I'm Kat Graham. I'm vice president of an organization called Humanity Road. We are a digital disaster response organization. We have volunteers who come online and man the internet 24/7. And, pardon me?
You may want to use the skis if you
want to. Thank you very much. So volunteers, this way? There we go. We are a 501c3 public charity. We have a couple hundred volunteers across the world who monitor social media and traditional media for emerging disasters as they happen. We have basically live monitored more events in social media than any other org on earth. We are also our president's co-chair with the USA Department of Homeland Security Virtual Social Media Working Group that just published their lessons learned from Sandy. We test innovative tools for data mining. We use some of these tools in the process of monitoring the internet daily for disaster. That's a little bit about our team. You can see some of the pictures there. We are also top-rated charity for 2012 and 2013. A little bit about some of the work of what we do and how we do it. Our volunteers have contributed 20,000 hours of service in 2012 in the service of monitoring disasters online. They monitor for people who are impacted and are isolated from aid or isolated from a situation. These are 4 examples of events that we did monitor. In New Zealand, someone was actually trying to text their parent who was in the Philippines and couldn't get through. She actually left several messages. That rescue was unsuccessful, unfortunately, but she did try for quite a while to reach someone. Unfortunately, the rubble was there was just too much damage. There was no way anyone could find her. In Alabama, though, a gentleman did text his friend and said, "I'm alive," and his friend came and dug him out. In Haiti, there was a Canadian woman who was texting from below the rubble to her relatives or contacts in Canada who mobilized assistance for her rescue. And in Turkey, some journalists were actually also the same situation. I think that happened in Facebook. So information emerges in social media that is empowered by the new ICT and technology age. Previously, where we thought we were disconnected from individuals, the voice lines go down. Cellular technology allows that connection to continue in the face of disaster. So this is actually a shot from Sandy. I think you heard Everett Bopp talk about this earlier. In Sandy, there was one community that was so severely impacted for 27 miles in a circumference area. There was no electricity. There was no communications in most of those areas. They had no running water because of the power. You know, they couldn't get water there, which meant they had no gasoline either. So this was a school and church who needed assistance, and they were simply opening their doors and saying, "Whatever you need, come here. And if you have something to give, come here." And it became overwhelmed constantly with the donations that came in, which was a wonderful thing. Empowering ICT communications in a blackout zone is extremely important. Where we're monitoring for disaster and we see someone from the outside area start talking about their family who is impacted inside, but they can't reach them, that becomes a big problem unless you can empower them with some sort of community or communications solutions. So the power of Facebook and social media have changed the way aid is mobilized. It is more of a lateral conversation. It's a conversation between family members who enable and empower each other for a neighbor-to-neighbor solution. However, you also have aid solution. You also have NGOs who have cropped up with ICT solutions and innovative technology solutions, and there are a lot of them, a lot of solutions. So out of this was born the Digital Humanitarian Network, and I'm going to get into that in just a moment. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the members who are part of the Digital Humanitarian Network. We have Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, Standby Task Force, GIS core, Esri, Geeks Without Bounds, Statistics Without Borders, Translators Without Boundaries. They all help communities manage the sea of information. The Digital Humanitarian Network was born to actually collaborate and bring a single solution for a community so they didn't have to deal with so many different technology organizations, and that they could go to one single source and say, you know what, I need A, B, C, and D, and that may mean these 3 organizations or those 2. And they didn't have to navigate that technology question. They could simply come and ask the question. What I like to say today is the this is a little bit outdated. This network grew last week, doubling and tripling in size. I'd like to say welcome to Libraries Without Borders for being one of the newest members. We're really, really thrilled to have them. So what do? They do media tracking. These technology organizations do media tracking, monitoring of social networks, software development, thank you, and programming, a lot of different types of solutions. And this type of thing is available to the community and also NGOs and agencies who are responding, because it is a huge data problem to solve. So I'm going to talk a little bit about early mapping and 3W reporting and how the DHN was born. In March of 2011, the UN OSHA reached out to the Standby Task Force and asked them for some help. There were IDP, a lot of individual displaced persons were migrating to outside the country, and IDP camps were popping up all over the place. They wanted a lot of information, and they needed it quickly. And so they tapped the Standby Task Force and said, can you help us collect this information? The Standby Task Force reached out to multiple partners and said, can you help us get this together quickly? And they stood up the first map that was provided for UN OSHA for that solution. It went really well. And after that was over, the individuals from the UN OSHA and the Standby Task Force and the other responding agencies got together and said, how can we improve this? How can we do this again? It went really well. What went wrong, what went well, and how can we improve that? And that's when the DHN was born. So it's been in existence for about 2 years. UN OSHA tapped us again for Typhoon Bofa in the Philippines. They needed damage assessment. Unfortunately, they needed it in 12 hours. And so we mobilized a team for them, and there was epic flooding in India just this year. This is a lot of information that they needed quickly. So in the end, the solutions were for population assessments. Ushahidi map was stood up, and I don't know if you were going to talk about that. You may be talking about that later. An Ushahidi map was stood up, and it was a crowdsourced solution, but it was not crowdsourced from the crowd. It was crowdsourced from a bounded group of volunteers to verify the data, get it stood up quickly and populated and put online. That was for population assessment. Then for damage assessment for Typhoon Bofa, they needed it in 12 hours. Volunteers went through 20 to 30,000 records of data to put together that map that you see on the screen there. And the third thing was the epic flooding in India. One of the items that they asked for, they had several, but I just chose one, was for aid assessment. And that is 3W, which is who is it, where are they, and what do they need? Aid agencies will tell you, please give here, but they don't really advertise, please get here. Those on the ground may not know who's providing them aid, and so the 3W report is something that's really important for others to use in the community. So in closing, the early mapping solutions, when you have collaboration and you have early results of that, and you have that quickly, the faster you get that out and the faster you can pull that together, you can provide a single source solution rather than having multiple duplicate efforts across different NGOs and different technologies. Having a single network like that prevents two different tech organizations from creating the same data source and then having us to have to deduplicate it later. This particular map that you're seeing, which was the BOFA map, ended up being a single solution map that was, the data for that was then later pulled into Google Crisis Map. And that created a fast, streamlined process and reducing the amount of multiple maps during disaster. So the Digital Humanitarian Network is a humanitarian response collaboration, and it promotes innovation, it promotes collaboration, it serves as a conduit to those aid agencies or those tech NGOs, and some of them are formal NGOs and some of them are informal NGOs. But it's innovation and it's an intellectual exchange that promotes collaboration. So.
Thank you. So now Angela Crandall will speak to us. Okay. So please take notes of your questions, and then we're going to hear them at the end of the three presentations.
So social media has been thought of as primarily for social reasons. But what we found actually through our research is that the content generated on social media can actually be used for purposes beyond just who's dating who. You can actually use the content to find situational awareness of what's happening on the ground and potentially to shorten response time in humanitarian crisis situations. So I'll be talking about two examples today from Kenya, which is where I work, and specifically to better understand how you can crowdsource through mobile and online tech and use it for a variety of purposes. My name is Angela Crandall, as mentioned, and I work with an organization called iHub, specifically with the research arm. We are an open space in Nairobi, Kenya, and the research arm does all things tech-related. So right now we're doing research around how robots can potentially be used for education. We're looking into open data and how it works or doesn't work. And most recently we've been doing research around crowdsourcing. So before I use the term much more, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. I know we're from a variety of backgrounds. So when I say crowdsourcing, I mean, quite literally, collecting information from the crowd. And crowdsourcing is not really a new concept, although it's become very popular recently due to the widespread use of mobile and online tech, as mentioned in the intro. Crowdsourcing really can allow you to reach out to a very wide and diverse range of people in an inexpensive way. Large amounts of data can be obtained, and I'll underline large because that can potentially be a negative, right? If you don't have the capacity to deal with that data, you need to find a solution for that, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a sec. But the incredible opportunity here is that it gives you access to potentially information in real time. So I'll also underline the word real time. And I think especially in the humanitarian context, that can be very important. Important to remember it's not necessarily only through tech that you can crowdsource, but for today's purposes, I will speak on online and mobile tech. So some examples, you may have heard of some of these. This is I Paid a Bribe, mapping out bribes in a variety of different countries, also in Kenya as well, I believe in India. Where users can come, maybe they've paid a small bribe to get their passport facilitated, and they can actually report. And so by aggregating this information in one place, it can help to push. I think this is being used by an individual to help push for policy action. This is another example. I won't talk too much about Ushahidi and Uchaguzi, but of course, if that comes up in the Q&A, I'd be happy to. This is a specific election context map of the Ushahidi map, where individuals can report on various things happening from the ground. So incidences of peace, potential election rigging from the ground, violence, et cetera, et cetera. Uchaguzi.co.ke. And Ushahidi's crowd map and actually the earlier I Paid a Bribe are examples of active crowdsourcing. So if you don't know about the platform, you won't be able to use it. Because if you don't know that if I SMS 3002, I can report to Uchaguzi, I won't send the information. So comparing that, open call, which needs to be spread out through marketing, through radio, TV advertisements, you can look at passive crowdsourcing. So passive crowdsourcing is looking through content that is already being generated. The user may be putting out on their Facebook status, I'm in Westgate right now about to have a coffee. To them, it's not information that they would be sending to someone, but eventually that information can potentially be used by someone for a purpose later. And so this is Twitter, Facebook, and other social media sites especially. So what does all of this mean for humanitarians? I wanted to make sure that you realize what the value is for all of you. So I think in times of humanitarian disasters, speed and scale of support are especially critical. And so this is why I underlined earlier the real-time aspect of this information and also the on-the-ground characteristic. So I might be able to speak about it briefly in the future, but one of the things we talked about in our research was that it was much easier through social media to actually get first-hand accounts than it was to actually go to the field and try to find eyewitnesses. So this kind of characteristic of the data can be especially vital in disaster situations to know where help is needed. We've heard some examples, and potentially predict reactionary outbreaks of violence. So especially in the Kenyan context, if someone hears about violence happening in one area of the country, this information could spur other violence in other areas. So it's very important for disaster response organizations to be able to be fully aware about this. So our research has shown that normally there are a few points of unique information, and much of the rest is actually in reaction to this original information. These reactions can be positive, they can also be negative. And then this information can be mined for more information and details. And so it's this process of mining, of finding the unique information that really can be useful for humanitarian response, other stakeholders, because it can help to reduce disaster response time, and again, increase your awareness of what's happening on the ground. So diving right into the two examples, I will speak around our 3 V's crowdsourcing framework and our MOTI project. 3 V's was a 6-month project that we were able to do thanks to support from the IDRC, specifically trying to understand these 3 V's, viability, validity, and verification. And so we were trying to understand why more people don't use crowdsourced data, and trying to better uncover what kinds of situations and events make crowdsourcing more viable than others. Does crowdsourcing information offer a true reflection of what's happening on the ground, or is it a skewed perspective from only the online communities? And also, is there a way in which the information provided through crowdsourcing can be verified? And if so, can that verification process actually be automated? I won't be able to answer all those questions in this session, but I do have some reports with me if any of you are interested in reading a bit more on it. So what we did, this is an oversimplification of what we did, but basically we did a cross-comparison of different media sources, specifically looking at traditional media, Twitter data, Uchaguzi raw data from the Uchaguzi deployment that Ushahidi ran, and we also went to the field in 3 different sites in Kenya. And what we found was basically that in the Kenyan context, during the March 2013 elections, which is what we used as kind of the backdrop, passive crowdsourcing, and you remember what that is, right? Okay, good. Passive crowdsourcing was actually viable. So we went, and during the 1 month, actually the day of March 3rd evening until April is when we started our Twitter capture. And we were able to, during that 1 month, capture 2.6 million tweets just by using a couple of filters. So we used a third-party application called DataSift, which captured initially the information that we thought would be relevant for us. So we used keywords such as kill, dead. We used usernames at Uhuru Kenyatta, who was one of the presidential running mates at the time and now president. We use place names, Kawangware, Mathare, Kisumu, and hashtags such as #KenyaDecides. And then from there, that's how we got the 2.6 million. We started to incorporate machine learning techniques to be able to sift further through that initial data, because as you remember, that's a lot of data to try and process. So we filtered through that, eventually to come out with 12,000 what we deemed useful or newsworthy information. And so these were events that could potentially have been verified and events that we characterized as possible to act upon. So if you were a response organization, you could have acted on these 12,000. Oh dear, my image is not showing. You'll have to get the report. That's what this means. So the beautiful image that I had here, which you'll have to imagine, was showing that what we found was that Twitter actually does break news. And we found that this could be up to a day in advance. Again, you remember, we compared traditional media online to the Twitter data that we captured, and we found that incidences, for example, I hope this one works, yes. This incident here in Kawangware actually showed that the event was not reported through traditional media, but we could hear that gunshots had actually happened in Kawangware, and people were discussing in first-hand accounts the event as it was unfolding. Another thing we also found, you'll see here in dark blue, was the first day that the report was reported on traditional media, whereas the Twitter activity is light blue. So you could see that there is a potential to look into this kind of data, to even look into potential predictions of incidences to come. That wasn't part of the scope of our research, but it's something that we believe should be looked into further. The graph is much prettier again in the report. but basically what it shows you here is that mining of Twitter data without machine learning would not have been feasible for us. You can see the first line there, linear search, would have been a manual search of the 2.6 million tweets, would have taken 270 working days. So by the time I was presenting this to you, it would not really have been relevant. But therefore, we are lucky to have the capacity on our team to actually bring it down to a search time of less than a second using machine learning techniques. So it's possible to deal with big data, but you do need some extra capacity, some extra skills. So as I hope my time is okay. There was so much I wanted to share with you today, so I will try to keep it short, but this is segueing into our second example, which is not all content online is good. And this is to talk about our Umati project. Umati is Swahili for crowd, and this was our online hate speech monitoring project. This is a project that's been ongoing for the past year, and really has been the first of its kind to create a systematic way for capturing and categorizing online hate speech. Why did we do this? What's so big about online hate speech? Well, in the run-up to the 2007-2008 post-election violence in Kenya, we noticed that actually there was a lot of sort of gathering of the crowd online. So people were using online spaces to actually pull together resources, send money from the diaspora to locals in country. And so we created this Umati project to better understand the kind of conversations happening in the run-up to this last election in 2013, this year. So the project goals were really to define the type of speech potentially harmful to Kenyan society, and therefore making a more clear line to know the limits and freedoms of speech. To protect freedom of expression, which we believe in very strongly. The idea behind Umati was also to better define a process for election monitoring that can potentially be replicated elsewhere, and to also further civic education on such speech that can potentially be dangerous. So what do we do, continue to do? Currently, we use a team of 5 human monitors who basically scan through content online, including blogs, forums, newspapers, social media, and collect information around a 5-point framework that has been developed by Professor Susan Benish of American University. So we worked together with Susan to basically develop an online process for grouping speech, potentially hate speech, into 3 categories: offensive, moderately dangerous, and extremely dangerous speech. You can read more about this online. And basically what this project has thus far found is that the online content that we've been collecting actually provides, let me say, a peephole, not even a window, a small peephole into the offline world. So the kinds of sentiments, the kinds of things that we've been getting actually, we believe, give us a view into the sentiments of people offline. This graph here shows you the sharp increase before and after the elections in online hate speech. The elections were on March 4th. And it also shows the high level of angst amongst the Kenyan public during this time. This shows you, again, the 3 different buckets that I mentioned: offensive, moderately dangerous, and dangerous here. Dangerous on the right-hand side, which is the highest category. Basically, in summary, since I know my time is short, the Kenyan social media content is really rich with this real-time updates about what's happening that really is not present in other forums. So mining of this kind of information, crowdsourced data, can be of high value, especially if you're looking for timely and local information. And I believe that this data should be cataloged to better understand how people can react to different events and contribute towards increasing your speed and your efficiency at responding. So I will leave you with that and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. No, John was something in his hand to show us, I believe.
Am I getting a lot of plosive? I used to be a journalist. I hate. Anyway, hey, my name's John. I'm from Ushahidi. Ushahidi is, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. Basically, we are 2 things. We are an organization and a movement, and it also happens to be the name of our first platform that we developed. So there's a little bit of overlap there. We'll be talking about a few, I want to kind of share a few things. I want to share a little bit about the history and kind of why we developed the Ushahidi platform and kind of the various products that came after that, and some of the challenges that we still continue to face in crowdsourcing information, and then kind of what we've come up with to address this to an extent, mostly to address it for ourselves, and some of the exciting stuff we think is coming up from that. Oh man, I ate my font. So yeah, like I was saying, we build tools that basically create transparency, that democratize information. We're global. We are concentrated in Kenya, but we've got developers and staff on pretty much every continent, and also places, islands, and just kind of all over the place. The platform itself was developed in 2008, kind of in the violence that came up after the 2008 elections that people have been talking about. The basic idea was really simple in the beginning. It was just, the Kenyan government had put a lockdown on external media. There was no information going out. The diaspora wanted to know what was going on. People on the inside didn't know what was going on. And so a group of blogger friends got together. They all kind of knew each other, and they'd all been talking about these ideas, and why don't we just try standing something up? And they quickly developed this very, the main dev is actually very, it developed this very basic system to map information, to gather information and to map it. And it evolved over time into Ushahidi. These are kind of 2 of the bigger deployments. We were kind of the main source of visual information during the Haiti crisis, in collaboration. I should be very clear about that. 4636, which Sahana mentioned earlier, was kind of this big collaborative thing, and we just and Ushahidi just visualized a lot of that information. Yeah. So so 2010 is when things really changed for us. We had been just developing the platform mostly for Kenya, and then just opening up to, it's an open source platform. Anyone can install it on their server and run it. 2008, we decided to deploy Ushahidi, an Ushahidi instance for Haiti in 2010. And then again with the Pakistan floods. And then again with the fires in Russia. And someone mentioned that this morning. Yeah, it's crazy how this stuff becomes powerful, not just because I think the fact that it's open, I think the fact that it's accessible for everyone that has a server that knows what they're doing, I think is really important and really powerful. And the last thing that we really collaborated with directly outside of Kenya was in 2011 with the earthquake and subsequent tsunami in Japan. And then we helped out with Egypt as well. And this is kind of this will give you a sense of how many instances and deployments of Ushahidi have happened. Starting with 350 and 210, and then we're over, and now actually that number is wrong. We've got even more than that now, but we've got over 40,000 instances, maps, gathering information. And this is CrowdMap. CrowdMap is basically a social network for mapping. Anyone could deploy it. It's hosted online. It's like Facebook for mapping, for gathering information. You can point people to it. There's an API if you want to develop apps. But anyone can get online and start using this and start mapping information, attaching pictures, attaching information. And this is kind of the, whoa. Thank you. And this is kind of the big thing. So the whole point of Ushahidi is to take in information from various sources, to verify that information as much as we can, to confirm the map location, to map it if there isn't geolocation already involved, and then to put it up. Obviously, that's a lot of work, and typically, an Ushahidi deployment looks something like a collaborative effort, and Uchaguzi is a really good example of that. I don't have a slide of it, but Uchaguzi was a consortium effort. In order for people to be able, in the developing world, to be able to easily give information to something like this, you need to have an easy way for SMS to work well. And that was a big part of, that's a big part of most campaigns that I think work successfully in the developing world, is you have to have SMS access. SMS sync is one way to do that, but there are others as well. And this is something that just came out of the violence in Westgate. Ushahidi has a way, our kind of ethos is that we scratch our own itches first. So we develop software and platforms that we need. After the violence in Nairobi a couple weeks ago at the mall, everyone kind of felt like they wished they had a way to be able to get a hold of their friends, their family, their loved ones quickly and say, "Are you okay?" And so that's what we developed. We developed Ping over a weekend. And a little bit longer than a weekend. And you can get a hold of that. That's also free and open, ping.ushahidi.com. And it's a brilliant, simple little system. And finally, we're trying to figure out how to actually address this big problem and crisis of, Twitter, like she was saying, is so huge. The information coming off of Facebook is so huge. How can we create a clearinghouse in crisis? And that's kind of our next thing that we're working on is crisis.net, and it's just in the works right now. But that's where we're aiming. Oh man, that's a bummer. But all this stuff is good, and software is good, and mobile phones are changing the world, and I think we all get that, right? Like I think that's clear for everyone. That all this stuff changes things, but we still find that our IT backup, our systems are based, we work in New Delhi and Kenya, and the people that we serve are all over the world, but the hard technology that we use tends to be developed for places like Paris and London and Los Angeles. And that becomes a problem eventually. You saw in the last, if you were here for the last session, you saw some of the extensive efforts that that disaster labs had to go through to get information technology, Wi-Fi into a local region. It's it's cables and all this infrastructure, and that's not feasible outside of places with big budgets and big operational infrastructure and things like that. For more ground level stuff, more ground level information and for people in the developing world, that's not a feasible option. And so we started developing Brick, and we started developing it for ourselves. This is a prototype. The Kickstarter happened in March, and it was a successful Kickstarter. We start manufacturing in 3 weeks. The basic idea is simple. It's rugged, it's weather resistant, it's dust proof. It has full feature Wi-Fi. It has it has a 3G 4G modem. And it with the modem on, running full bore, it runs over 8 hours. If you're using a more discrete information path, then the battery can last for days and days and days, depending on what you're trying to do with it. We'll be integrating Whisper, which is another kind of long-range slow connectivity technology. But yeah, so we developed this because we're developers in Kenya trying to stay online, trying to stay connected to our servers. And invariably the power goes out, and invariably, things happen. And so we wanted a router and we wanted a modem that allowed us to, so we have our cable modem, we've got our switches and our server, and, but, that's, when that stuff dies, the modem dies. When that stuff dies, when the power dies, everything stops. And that's true, if there's a blackout, all that Twitter stuff just kind of goes up and it stays on local servers until it can move up. So these things are so that's kind of why we started developing it. So Brick is a hardware in cloud service technology. We already kind of talked about that. Man, this is rough. I'm so sorry, guys. And I guess I've kind of touched over most of this. It's developed for places with unreliable power, unreliable connectivity, and challenging environments. We believe that the world needs a backup generator for the internet. We have a backup generator for our servers. We have a backup generator for almost everything else in developing world contexts, especially in humanitarian contexts. We need a backup generator for the internet. And then we started realizing that it's not just that we need internet. We need machines to be able to talk to the internet. We need multiple options for the internet. We need to be able to manage this easily on things that aren't, I shouldn't have to plug into Ethernet to manage this. I shouldn't have to even have a computer to manage this. And so we decided to build an API system. We decided to create a machine scripting language similar to Arduino, if you're familiar with that. We've got this prototype doesn't have it because I broke it, but it has a GPIO port on the bottom, so you can start stacking stuff underneath it and start doing machine-to-machine communication. And that sounds, when you think about that, you're talking about gathering information to understand how things are happening. The ability to have sensors in the field, have low bandwidth cameras in the field, to know, if you're doing well monitoring, to know what what your day-to-day usage is, to know if, the monitor hasn't moved in 5 days, the flow monitor on a well, maybe something's wrong with the well. And now you don't have to have someone driving out there every 2 weeks. You can just be monitoring it. That just changes things pretty significantly. So that's, so 2 bricks, 1 roll, and that's kind of what we're talking about. And the last thing, man, I'm so sorry. Final mile, last mile, is another way that some people have put that. This and TV white space, this and some of the low-cost satellite stuff that's coming out the pike. This is the sort of thing that could be affordably deployed to a local service provider to be able to provide internet for people that normally can't get a hold of it. This could create VoIP. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that can come out of it, but I think in the Ushahidi way, we're not going to try to prescribe too much what this is capable of. We're going to leave it really open and let people decide what they want to do with it. But yeah, I think that's pretty much me. This is kind of our ethos, and I'll just kind of leave it with that.
Thank you very much, John. And thank you, Kat and Angela, for the previous presentations. Now, I don't know if we have a mic to pass around, but we're going to take questions from the room.
My first question will go to Kat. I'd be curious to know if Digital Humanitarian Network is interested also to work as an interface for out of crisis time. You get the idea. So because sometimes NGOs want also to have support from communities, the digital communities, out of a crisis. Thank you.
Thanks for asking that. I should have covered that in my presentation earlier, but yes, the DH network does do crisis and disaster response as well as blue sky projects like you're talking about. And so really what it requires is just emailing the team, I think it's coordinators at Digital Humanitarian. But visit the website and then you can contact them and say, can you help us with this project? And a coordinator will review the project and identify what type of solution teams might be eligible or available to do the work for you. Yes.
Next question. If you can give your name and maybe organization, if that's relevant. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dugukolo Konare from Tabital Pulaku International, which is an organization for helping the Fulani people, which are a nomadic people of Africa. So I had a question very akin to the previous question. How can we get training for all of this? Because I mean, on the field, we have been asking ourselves those questions for quite some time. When something happens to a herder, how can they voice that event? Can they just send a text message and say something happened to me, and have it show up on a map, so we can gather data and we can also have interventions? But you need to be very knowledgeable about technology, I guess, in order to put all this together, and we have no skills basically about any of this. So how can we get that, and how can we empower the communities on the field who are not literate at all about using those tools, and they don't have Twitter or Facebook? It's a general question. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Somebody?
At a community level, technology at a community level is, you're right, they need to have that technological training to do so. Technology is never going to replace the local effort for disaster response as far as having an urgent need for rescue or some other type of aid. But there are online sessions that train. I know that I have seen some trainings for the platforms such as Ushahidi. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of social media online virtual training sessions, some that are being put on by the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA. FEMA has some training courses on that type of thing. As far as technology, I'll leave that to some of the others.
So iHub research started for two reasons. One was to surface information for the startup community, and the second was really to increase capacity and really make sure to improve research capacity, but also data handling capacity. And we just recently launched our new data lab, iHub Research Visualization Data Lab. And basically through that, especially looking probably at 2014, we'll be leading a number of different regular trainings around how to do some of the stuff that we discussed here.
And just kind of on a more practical level, I think, or not more practical, excuse me. If you can keep it down to SMS, I think that I'd be happy to show you later. Like, I think it's really easy to make that pretty low weight from a technology standpoint.
Border nations. Mm-hmm. They live in Niger, in Mali, in Mauritania, and so on. So we want to have basically one central way of getting information and then dispatching it to partners. Dispatching it to partners and local antennas that can then do the interventions. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah. So I mean, the more that you plan and take on the load as an organization, the more infrastructure you create, the less IT load there is on the user, in my experience anyway. So the more that you coordinate with telcos and create shortcodes, SMS shortcodes, 3646 is an example of an SMS shortcode. So all people in Haiti had to do was dial what was going on, where they were at, to the number 4636 instead of, you know, a regular cell phone number or something like that. And doing things like that, and we can talk about that. But a lot of that knowledge is actually on the Ushahidi wiki, and that's just right there on our site, ushahidi.com. And there's other places too.
And maybe just to add, preparation in advance, I think, is really key. And this is something that we're also trying to see how we can test out a bit more in Kenya. Because even though SMS is very useful and maybe one of the more accessible, definitely, than Twitter and Facebook still, but even voice might be more accessible than that, or radio might be more accessible than that. So figuring out a way to practice before the humanitarian crisis situation erupts, how people will be using such things can really, I think, help also.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Maria from the University of Washington. Thank you very much for the presentations, really interesting. I have a question, I think applies for the three of you. How do you validate the information? That's like the most important and probably critical area in this big data capturing and analyzing, and probably the one that also requires more resources. In your experience, and what are the different ways in which you're able to validate the information on the ground as much as possible?
Good question. I'm going to give 3 examples. For Libya, we were validating information through several different stories because we are collecting information from new media and traditional media. So we're looking for information that's emerging in the community, from the community itself, first off, and also from the reporters who are reporting it on the scene. If those cross-validate, we try to verify ×2 any piece of information when it comes in like that. And then in the case of Typhoon Bofa, and you're looking for impacts of a certain village. And so in this instance, I don't need to know that this person resides at X and Y coordinate, because I'm not delivering a bottle of water to X and Y coordinate. I need to know, is there a lot of things happening in one location? And then that populates more information, so it's proximity reporting. And that provides proximity information for situational awareness for the large NGOs. In the case of Libya, they didn't need exactly to know this item is exactly true or that one is, but when you have hundreds of reports coming from one area, then you know you at least have an IDP camp in that location. So we're verifying the source of the information. We're verifying whether or not that information is showing up in other areas as well. So it's verified ×2.
So in the Uchaguzi deployment of Ushahidi, this was for the Kenyan elections, you'll remember both of us have mentioned, the verification team comprised of on-the-ground election monitors from the CRECO group that basically were in charge of responding via text back to the Situation Room, which was at the iHub, to verify things that they witnessed on the ground. The research work that we conducted was experimental to see if it could be possible to look at the data itself and see if there were characteristics within the data that could potentially indicate verification or not. Because you can imagine deploying a whole team of people on the ground is very ineffective cost-wise. I'm sorry to say I don't have the answer for you yet. It's really a tough question, a tough nut to crack. Otherwise, it would have been done by now, right? But I think it's an ongoing question that we're planning on looking into. There are certain characteristics that we've noted of people who really tend to have large followings, that tend to add pictures. You know, there are different levels of sort of triangulation of data. But we have found also that, you remember that when I was saying positive and negative reactions to the unique content. So often you can see, based on the way the crowd is also reacting, can really also help to give a better indication of sort of whether or not that content can be true or not. But I don't think there's a definite, it's not, 1-0, yes, no. I don't think we'll ever get to that. But there's definitely characteristics that you can look at that can give you indications.
You did answer my question, so thank you.
I could ask to retry a question that I think the BBC has a special cell dedicated to monitoring the social medias and trying to check if it works or not, if it's real information or not. I'm not sure exactly what this cell is called, but I'm sure you'll find information. Another question, maybe?
Thank you.
No? If nobody has a question, I have one.
I have one.
I wondered, because all the activities you are describing are pretty, could be pretty disruptive of a number of established institutions, be it the police, the traditional media, or even the traditional humanitarian actors, sometimes huge ones. So I wondered how you were received, your initiatives were received by those kind of actors, and if you found ways to work with them, or maybe they adapted to it.
I steal the first answer. You mentioned traditional media, and I think that one could say, actually, BBC, I think, recently had a session in Nairobi looking at, is the BBC outdated? Are they not going to be relevant anymore in this day and age of new media? But I think the answer is no. I think it's definitely still important to have traditional media engaged in this discussion. And actually at the launch event for our report, we invited many media houses who showed up because we believe that this is a tool that they should have in their arsenal. It's not one or the other, right? And it's important that traditional media understands how to use such things, how to take advantage of all this user-generated content. And I think that will help improve the type of work that they also do. So we are working, and I didn't get a chance to show my next steps, but we're working on a tool actually for media houses who may not be as tech savvy, who don't know machine learning, to be able to actually now go through all of this content and find newsworthy stories, as our research showed.
Yeah, I mean, Al Jazeera, I want to say 2009, I might be wrong about that, did a deployment of Ushahidi to track some of the violence in Palestine. I think that what it really is that the role of the assumption that we've had in the West about what we need journalism to do has always been we need it to gather all the information and to be like a linear pipe. And I think that the role now is just that there's a funnel in front of that pipe now, is all that it is. I think that the best thing that journalists can do is to see themselves now as curators and like ardent seekers of veracity, of truth, and to curate that information. Because I think you know, like if you look at the Twitter fire hose, the proper fire hose, or even you know streams sometimes are just unmanageable to make sense of, unless you have a server and you can do machine learning, which I can't. So yeah, I think we're still reliant on journalists, but we're reliant for a larger, bigger picture. I think is more what it comes down to.
I think that I think you're right about that, and I see a trend where agencies and formal agencies, from UN OSHA to UNICEF to World Food Program, FEMA, even Department of Defense, multinational organizations involved in the Pacific Asian Basin. There's a 22-nation organization called MSIP. It's a I won't get into it, but anyway, it's a multinational exercise happens every year where each nation participates together, and they're also looking at this. And I think that more of the agencies are more accepted to it now that they have seen it come out of the box, where before they were like, this is not, we don't want to deal with this. And now it's like, okay, it's there, but I'm not going to look at it. And now they're dealing with this in a way where they're saying, okay, how can I get engaged with it? And how can we work together? And what are the questions I need to ask in order for us to work together so that we can get that? So I see a definite change in that.
Okay, great. Well, maybe another question from the crowd. You are the crowd. We are crowdfunding the questions right now, live. No? No more questions?
I have one clarification question, if you allow me to
Great.
be completely
sure.
selfish. Could you please explain what you mean by machine learning? Briefly.
So I'm not the one who actually does it myself either. So don't ask me anything more technical, but basically the concept is using algorithms, so different formulas, to basically be able to automate and sort through, as opposed to a human being having to sit at the computer and do it. So it sometimes requires more computer juice than one can actually provide. So we're lucky at the iHub, we have a supercomputer cluster. So it's the power of 12 computers basically in one. And so we were able to push all of that data that I talked about onto that sort of supercomputer, which then we taught algorithms. So basically it's teaching the computer what to do, and it can churn through that for you.
Olivier.
Sarat, Group URD. We'll have a last question about the digital humanitarian network. Your mandate is actually quite huge, because if you try to work as an interface between the formal humanitarian system and all the various voluntaries and technical communities, it's quite huge, even more if you are dealing with crisis and out of crisis situation. So what's your path to scale? Because there are so many needs you could cover and so many communities you could cover. So, for example, how do you choose between needs to cover or not, organizations to, technical organizations to rely to or not to rely to, etc., etc.?
Good question. We do not try to limit the funnel. We're not going to make it narrow or thick. Or, you know, we're there. The digital humanitarian network is there as a conduit for the information and the inquiries. In other words, if we receive an inquiry from Uttarakhand, India, that they had 4,200 villages impacted and they needed mapping. Is that too big for our network? We don't know the answer to that. We need to turn to our network. So we'll turn to the network and say, we have this request, can you deal with it? And so in that, we empower the members and the technology members of the network to make that decision on their own, to say, I think I can handle this. Or one can step up and say, you know what, I can take one piece of this. Because often the project is so large that it does need that collaborative answer. And perhaps several mapping groups need to combine together and divide the project up so that they can conquer it. So we don't set any limits on that as far as that goes. It is about whether it's disaster or not, and it's blue sky or you know, whether it's disaster or blue sky. So until we get to that point where we say, you know, I think we're going to have to narrow this, I think that the network is going to stay with that mandate and allow the members to say, stop, we can't deal with that one. And if we can't, then the network will turn back to the person who requested it and say, we can't handle this at this time. Yes?
Another question? If there are no other questions, I think we can finish the session and maybe, or open maybe a final closing word for any of you, if you wish to say something that you haven't had the opportunity to.
Maybe just one thing. If you're curious about crowdsourcing information and mapping, do try out, just go to crowdmap.com and just start playing with it a little bit. I think it'll help you really understand the power of this type of tool. That's all.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Angela.